There we go. Yep. Feels like a decent fish. It is a decent fish. Oh my god, it's got giants with it. Guys, are you seeing this?
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Be the Fish. And today's video, obviously, we're not on the water. We are here in the podcast studio talking to you guys about a bait that I really enjoyed getting to learn this past year and has found its way into one of my mainstays moving forward. You might have been able to guess in that first clip, and we're going to overlay some more fish catches with this specific bait throughout this video. But if you couldn't guess, it is the hover rig. This bait has definitely been taking off in the past year in regards to people talking about it, fishing it, different companies getting on making their own style of jig head for it. And it's certainly been creating some buzz, and for good reason. Now, for whatever reason, I don't get too crazy on the hype of new baits and things like that. I kind of like, it's my own fault. I should be, as an angler, and curiosity has it, trying different things. But I usually kind of let some people poke around and get some feedback before I go and order some stuff. This one, when I tried it out, no one has really been throwing it, at least within my circle. So I decided to give it a shot just because it was a time where slow for tournaments, things like that. I wanted to just go out and throw this bait, see and try some different things and see what I can get fish to commit on. Some of you, if you haven't seen the hover rig, I'm going to walk you through what this bait actually looks like. There's a couple different jig heads that I've tried this year that I found success on. I'm going to walk you through my favorite bait to rig up on this jig head, as well as the setup that I'm using, where I'm throwing it, how to set the hook with these jig heads, because it's not exactly the most heavy duty. They are currently making ones from Core Tackle that have a little bit beefier of hooks, and also highlight a different spin that you can take on this bait as well. That will give all credit out to Ben Milliken. He's been showing it. He calls it the hover juggle. We'll show that as well. So to give you guys some different options on how you can manipulate these baits to be something that these fish that you're fishing for have not seen yet. So the two best jig heads I found for this technique is Core Tackle and Gambler. I'll show you guys close-ups of those. Really the only difference between Core and Gambler is just the makeup of the pointed end of that jig head where it inserts back into the bait. We're going to show you guys how to rig this up as well. What you can see is it has a pointed end to it where the line tie is a little bit farther back, and that allows that bait to sit perfectly horizontal when it's falling in the column, and give certain baits, what we're going to show you why is my favorite bait to rig on this, a completely different presentation that these fish have not seen, and allow a bait to fall in such a manner that you can't get on a Texas rig or a jig, things of that nature. So this one specifically is designed to be more weedless because you can see a little bit of a steel weed guard here. This one from Core Tackle specifically is designed to be more weedless because it does have a little bit of a wire guard here to try to protect from anything like that. Doesn't work too well. I usually end up actually just cutting it off or trying to get ones without that wire guard, because I've noticed, where I've been fishing it, it hasn't really made a huge difference. If anything, it gets more grass on it. So I usually take that off. But the hook itself, the hook on the Core Tackle as well as the Gambler, they look very, very similar. Whereas the one I just held up, the Gambler is a 2-aught, Core Tackle is a 1-aught. Smaller hooks make it a little bit easier to pin these fish, especially because they're lighter wire. It's a little bit easier, which is why we're going to talk about why the setup I'm using is the way it is. The importance of this rig is the line tie. That is the most important aspect about it, where that weight is centered, where you tie your line to, and that allows your bait that you rig up on this to fall at a completely different presentation than these fish have seen. Almost similar to throwing it essentially weightless, but now you just have a little bit more weight to give it a little bit down faster. You can fish it much quicker, and allow you to actually cover some more water with this stuff and kind of replace some different techniques like a Texas rig, a jig, things like that you've used in the past. This can be something completely different, especially if you're fishing for pressured fish. All right, so let's get into the rigging of the bait. But before I do that, I want to show you guys my favorite bait to put on this hover rig. So my favorite bait for this technique is going to be the Berkley MaxScent Creature Hog. And there's a reason for it. And it's actually going to lead me down a whole spiral of trying some different baits that are similar to this from a beaver aspect. But the Berkley MaxScent Creature Hog is very flat in nature. So you can see this beaver here is very simplistic. It's just got a big main frame, thick. You can see how that's like almost perfectly flat there. Nothing crazy, not a very odd shape. A couple tails here back on that don't have much action. It's very simple. It's a beaver bait. You're not supposed to get a lot of action out of the tail. That's what provokes those bites. But when that is laying flat, it creates a whole different fall. Whereas if you have a Texas rig, it falls nose first with the head facing down. But with the hover rig, it falls completely flat, as if you were throwing, say, a weedless Senko, things like that. Or this creates a very unique fall. And we're going to rig it up and show you guys what I mean. So how to rig this is you take your hover rig and your bait. And what you are going to do is to best do it once you get comfortable, is you line it up and measure it like so. Kind of like you would do with an EWG to see where you need to put your hook out. That way you can have the bait be perfectly flush. It's the same deal with this. You can see where your line tie is supposed to be. We'll mark that where it's right there. That's where that jig head is supposed to land. You can see right there is the eye of the hook. I'm gonna mark that with my thumb, and that is exactly where I'm gonna insert my hook. We're gonna go in at an angle, try to be perfectly in the middle of that bait, and thread that bait on almost towards the end here. What we're gonna do is bring that out. It almost creates almost some sort of a Nico weight at the end in regards to inserting that bait. What we're gonna do is push it onto there. See how that's threading right through the bait, and you're threaded all the way to that eye of the jig is touching the bait. And what you do is you can see this is all that's left to remain to be inserted into the bait. So what you're going to do, just grab the eye there. You're going to grab that bait and you're going to push this up and wrap it over the front and insert this. One of the reasons I really like the Gambler one, it's got a little bit more of a pointed end to it. And then you're going to jam that into the front of that bait. Definitely helps with max scent being a little bit softer too, that it sticks a little bit better. Jam it in the front. And there you are. You have your hover rigged max scent creature hog. So as you can see, that's where your line tie is going to be. Your line's going to be coming up front. So when it falls perfectly flat like so. And you can see with this underwater footage how that bait has a really unique fall. Where a beaver, it's essentially similar, but it's allowing that bait to lie flat and give a more natural presentation. Where if it's not, it's head first when you have a Texas rig, things like that. This allows this to have a completely unique fall. For throwing that max scent creature hog, my favorite setup that I found thus far, it's a little bit that the max scent creature hog is very dense, being that it's max scent. For those of you that thrown max scent before, you've seen that it's kind of a more moist, denser plastic. So it creates a little more weight. So you can throw it on a spinning setup if you want. I like to throw it on a casting setup, at least for that creature hog. I'm going to show you guys an example of something I'll throw on a spinning setup for this, because a lot of these jig heads are very light and you can be more efficient with a spinning setup. But for me, I'm throwing a 7.2 medium heavy fast casting rod, something that has a little bit more length to it, but also isn't too short, that I can cast a decent length, that I can cast a decent distance, but also maintain control of that bait and have a long enough rod, more parabolic, so that I can get that hook pinned, have more control at a distance. For me, I just think I like longer rods in general when it comes to fishing, because but here's where I think this is most crucial, because sometimes it can be pretty hard to, when I first threw this bait on the hover rig, I threw straight fluorocarbon, and it can be difficult to understand when you're getting bit, because that bait takes a long time to fall within that water column, pending the depth you're fishing it in. And there was a couple times where I had fish on, had no idea. It was more of like watching my line than anything else. But I switched it up in regards to this setup that I'm going to walk through with you line wise. And it definitely helped me feel more bites. And that is, I used, I think it's an 8:3 to 1 gear ratio, Abu Garcia Xenon. It's in that 8 range, lower 8 range. So I could pick up my line fast. But what I did was I spooled up that Xenon with 20-pound braided line, and I had a longer 12-pound fluorocarbon leader. So what I was able to do is still have that fluorocarbon leader, but with that 20-pound braid, very thin diameter, easy to cast, especially with this bait being lighter. What I was able to do is feel those bites mid-column as that bait was falling much easier because of that braided main line. So I switched to that, and that's exactly what I've loved, and I'm sure that's going to change. It's going to take more experimenting with this bait around different times of year, different situations. But I found that I was getting bites that no one else was getting around some more pressured fish, throwing this bait when everyone else is throwing a Texas rig, a jig, things of that nature. It definitely seemed to work out, and we'll show you guys some examples here as you've seen. But another bait that I really love to throw on the hover rig, that is going to be the Hog Farmer Spunk Shad. It's got a very interesting tail to it, so when you do lift it, it has some really nice action, and it falls like a dying shad. I'm going to show you guys this bait. You've probably seen this as like a chatterbait trailer, but it's got a thicker end to the head like a swim bait would, like a Rage Swimmer or a Kitech. Great for rigging this bait, gives you a lot of room, but then has this tail with a lot of action that allows for one very unique pull, what I was talking about earlier, but also when you fall, allows that bait to have a nice little wiggle as that bait is falling. Something pretty unique that these fish don't see. That's what I'll throw on a spinning rod. So I'll take like a 7-foot medium up to another, like I was talking about earlier, 7.2, like a little bit of a longer rod to pin these fish. 7-foot, 7.2-foot medium, and I'm using 15-pound braid to 10-pound fluorocarbon. So rather similar in regards to specs as the casting setup, but it allows me with that spinning setup to cast that bait much farther. And you're a little bit more sensitive in regards to, like I said, that line from braided to fluorocarbon. Especially with the lighter line, you can feel those bites a little bit easier. And the reel that I'm using on that is going to be a Abu Garcia Revo Rocket. I don't work with Abu Garcia or anything like that. These are just the choices that I've used to my disposal here. The Revo Rocket's the fastest spinning reel on the market. Biggest thing for me in this situation is line pickup, because you want that bait to fall completely on its own. So you need to leave that line slack, just like you would with a wacky rig, things like that. You want to have line slack to allow that bait to present itself. It's got the action, let the bait do the work. So in doing that, when I see my line, see my bait getting eaten on my line through that braided line, high visibility line, I'm able to pick it up fast with that high gear ratio. I think it's a 7.6 to 1 spinning reel. And whether you're throwing the casting setup or the spinning setup, do not set the hook like it's a jig or a Texas rig, because it's a completely different hook. I know they do make some more heavier duty ones. I believe Core Tackle came out with a heavier duty version, and you can surely do that. The best way I've found to pin these fish, and these hooks are sticky. They will get them good. It's like any other jig head. When the hook's that exposed, it's pretty easy to pin these fish well and get them in the boat. Your hookup ratio is going to be very good. But the best way I've figured out how to get this hook jammed in the roof of their mouth every single time is simply almost like you're throwing a drop shot. It's going to be reeling into them and leaning. It's a reel set, but you're going to lean back on these fish. So essentially exactly like you would a drop shot, just reel and lean back. And you can see that, like, I'm not setting the hook on any of these fish. It is straight up a reel. Sometimes I'm letting the reel and that rod setup do all the work for me, but I'm leaning back a little bit against these fish, and that hook is going to pin perfectly. Now, you might ask, because there isn't a true weedless version of this just yet. There's different ways you can rig it to manipulate that, which will come out here in a little bit. We'll talk about later. You might ask, where are you going to throw this? What are you going to throw it around? The biggest thing that I found productive wise, without getting your bait hung up too much, is around grass lines, docks, any sort of shallow structure. I have figured out, you can definitely use this deep. It takes a little bit while to get down there, depending what the depth you're fishing at, but it's definitely been worth it, because what you can do too, especially with this creature hog, is when it comes down, you can knock your line slack, and what it'll do is it'll make that bait bounce side to side, almost like you're walking it like a topwater. It's really unique in action. And for lack of a better word, you can hover that bait above whatever cover you're fishing out deeper or above fish, and it can deliver some pretty good strikes, especially at that depth. They don't see anything like that. We're letting a little juice out of the bag here for you guys with this video, but I felt like it was worth sharing because it's something that I really picked up on this past year. But also, don't be afraid to throw it around some wood where you are going to get hung up, but be strategic and smart about where you place it, because you can see there's a couple of the clips in this video where I've caught fish around wood specifically, and it can be very well. The nice thing about it is, especially if you can be in clear water where there's higher visibility, you can use your polarized shades to be able to place that bait better, where you're not going to get hung up as much, where you can get pretty dang close to like that thick stuff, but have that bait fall just outside of it, because it's going to fall so slow. The fish inside that stuff are going to come out, and they'll have a lot of time to see that bait falling just on the edge of that strike zone. Or it's not like a Texas rig where you're going to put it in the middle. You're not going to be able to do that with this bait. But this is going to be a great bait to throw around docks, bridge pilings, a lot where there's not a lot of stuff to get hung up on per se, because that line tie being on top, you don't have to worry about it bumping into rocks or anything like that. You can be creative where you throw this bait. You can put it into holes in grass, things like that. Be creative where you throw it. I mean, especially with something that it's rather new, experiment, and they're not priced too crazy, so you can go and get a little wild with them and not be too worried about losing some baits. Nonetheless, it's found its way into my arsenal 100%. It's one that I'll be having rigged and have a whole entire setup dedicated toward it because of how unique it is moving forward. Now, if you want any of the gear that I talked about in this video, I'll link it all down below, from the casting setup, spinning setup, as well as the baits that I like to use in them. I'll link them to Omnia Fishing, and you can use our discount code to save you some money on them, as well as I will link down the podcast that we did with the man himself, Matt Steffen, who talked about the Core Tackle, specifically that hover rig that they came out with We did a whole podcast on Serious Angler with Matt Steffen. I'll link that down below, as well as linking down below a video to Ben Milliken's channel where he talks about his hover juggle, which is actually, I believe it's a victory hook from Do It Molds that he places in there, inserts a Nico weight, and is able to manipulate that bait similar, if anything, or maybe almost a little bit better presentation to these fish. One that I've been trying to do, but I don't think I can do it justice the way that Ben Milliken's done, because he's really made that thing perfection and crushes them down at. So I'll leave a link to one of the videos from him. He has no idea I'm even linking that, but I just want you guys to know because I want to share that information with you guys. So go and watch that because you can definitely learn from him. But nonetheless, I hope you guys learned something from this video. If you like this style, I know I don't sit here and talk to you guys all that much. A lot of my videos are straight up fishing. If you like this stuff, especially over the wintertime when I'm going to have the time to do this and walk through some different things, please let me know down below. If you have ideas of stuff you want me to walk through, put them down in the comments, DM me on social. If you like this, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the Be the Fish YouTube channel. We'll be talking to you guys real soon. Appreciate y'all. Peace.